there is something about that tangle of strangers, pressed together for days with nothing in common but the need to go from one place to another and never see each other again. I see evil on this train. A passenger has died.
All aboard another tour with the Film Board from the next reel on rashpixel.fm. We spoil movies, and this month we will be peeling away at the onion of Agatha Christie's Murder on the Orient Express. Did I mention that we spoil movies? Because this is a mystery, and we're going to spoil it. If you listen to the end of this podcast, you will know who the murderer is, although it was originally published in 1933. That's the book. So many folks out there in the world are already spoiled for this one before they buy the ticket. You may be one of those types of people, but if not, we're going to bring you there today on a train. Let's introduce our hosts. Tonight, the last time that we three thugs were together, we discussed another book adaptation in Stephen King's The Dark Tower, and we started out by describing our history with the source material for some context. And while I'm not trying to be redundant with this show again, but I think it's super important, we attack this in the same way. So, for each of our hosts, how much do you love Agatha Christie? That is Andy Nelson.
Hey there. It's funny. I think I've only read one Agatha Christie novel, and it was 10 Little Indians, which we read in junior high in my English class. That's the only one that I've read. I've seen a few of the adaptations, and I actually only recently saw, like in the last few months, the 1974 Murder on the Orient Express. But weirdly, when I was watching it and the ending hit, I realized, this is that movie that ends this way. Like I knew the ending without knowing what movie it was or what the story was. So it was kind of spoiled without realizing the property. But that's my history with it.
Interesting. Tommy, do you read Agatha much?
No, not at all. Actually, I've only read 10 Little Indians, which I was about to call 12 Little Indians before Andy went. So clearly I am not that familiar with the material. All I knew about this was it was a locked room murder mystery that took place on a train. That was it.
I think that was the Soderbergh sequel, wasn't it? 12 Little Indians.
Right. Well, yes. Of course. Well, actually, and you guys know that they did rename the book because of its politically incorrect, insensitive name. It's now called And Then They Were None. And it is one of my cherished books from my childhood. I know, Tommy, you've talked to in the past about having a sick book, one that you go back to when you're sick. Mm-hmm. I would say And Then There Were None / 10 Little Indians is as close as you can get to that for me. I love that book. And as a mystery, it's for me, probably in terms of literature, one of my top 3. So I think it's interesting that all of us have listed that as our Agatha Christie exposure. That being said, I knew nothing about Murder on the Orient Express. So I think, Andy, it sounds like you're pulling the most weight as far as the pre-spoiled version of this show. So it's going to be interesting for us to figure out how much being spoiled matters as we spoil everything for the listeners out there. And guys, I want to talk about today, November 11th. That's when we're recording this. It's the Next Reel's 6th anniversary.
Oh, happy birthday!
So I want to tell everybody that there. 11/11, kind of a special day, right?
It was actually 11/11/11 was the,
whoa, never forget
the day we started. So
that is charmed. This show that we're recording right now, this Film Board, is going to be the 421st episode, and it will push us beyond 500 straight hours of total movie podcasting. So Pete and Andy, you started some great things out there, and it's good that you're here, Andy, because if you weren't, you wouldn't have that legacy voice to bring us through on this 6th birthday. So happy birthday to you.
Pretty exciting stuff. And here's to the next 6 and beyond.
Everyone out there listening, you can find out more about this show and its sibling shows at thenextreel.com and follow us on Facebook and Twitter at The Next Reel to find out about all the fun shows we're pushing out to the podcast verse. Let's get started with the new Murder on the Orient Express. Initial thoughts. Andy, what did you think of the movie?
It was a fun one. I thought that Kenneth Branagh did a pretty good job with this story. I think why people are drawn to this as a particularly interesting Agatha Christie story to tell is because it probably is asking a lot more questions about, the the ethics of right and wrong and just all of that, which you're not necessarily getting in some of the other mystery stories, which are just really kind of straight up whodunits. At least that's my impression of them. This one has a lot of other stuff going on. And so I think that's a really interesting thing about this story. That being said, I think that while there are some definite requirements you have for good mysteries, a lot of red herrings, a lot of interesting characters with motives, maybe some interesting alibis, and a satisfactory resolution that does kind of connect everything and helps everything all of a sudden make sense, which on multiple viewings, you can really start pinpointing all those different things. I think for the most part, it works here. I think there are elements that I struggled with, particularly through a lot of the second act investigation, which I didn't feel was as concise as it could have been. That being said, when I got to that final reveal and the resolution, I felt very satisfied.
Yeah, and I think that's, I think some people could probably argue that that's kind of the main thing about this movie. That's maybe the thing that makes this landmark, while everything else is really a foundational mystery. How about you, Tommy? What did you think?
I was extremely disappointed in the movie. I was really excited with the idea of a locked room mystery. The thing I like about mysteries is not that I can figure them out before they're done. I'm not ever smart enough to do that, but that I'm given the chance to at least feel that I could have or put things together. And I actually think that this is a really problematic story now that I've seen it. I haven't read the book, obviously, but now that I've seen it, this seems like a very problematic mystery to feel, at least for me, satisfactory, because it is so drenched in an off-screen family and series of events that there's very little that you can put together on your own, because the reveals happen to be who knows who in this family that we only meet in a couple weird flashbacks. As a result, I found it personally very dulling. I wasn't bored, but I was confused. I didn't think that the characters were anything special, and I was pretty frustrated the entire time.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's interesting. So now, Andy, knowing what you knew about the story going in, do you think, and especially because you're the only one that's seen the 1974 version, was most of the exposition of the sort of solving the mystery done in flashback or sort of off screen, like Tommy's talking about, in that film as well?
No, not necessarily. But what that film did, which I think this one really struggled with, I feel like my struggle with that whole investigation portion is because it just leaves stuff so unclear. Like Tommy said, it's a lot more muddled than it really should have been. And the 74 version begins with like newspapers, like you're getting the entire Armstrong story and you're getting all the different characters. You're not seeing them, but you know that, there was a driver and there was a cook and there was a governess. Like there were these various people that were somehow involved in that particular Armstrong story. And you don't know that those people are these people that we now are with in the train until we get to the end, but we have a context. And that's where this film really lacked, because the context they gave us for the Armstrong case was really weak, and there's really no way to piece anything together in this one, I didn't think.
So that makes sense now, thinking about it. The movie didn't hit me as disappointing as you mentioned, Tommy, but I didn't notice that. I think I was giving it a whole lot of luxury about the fact of this really amazing cast, the really sort of the pretty pictures that I was seeing on screen, and really kind of like chugging along with Poirot's story, which is what this movie was. But I think now, thinking about what you're saying about how really the solving of the mystery or the sort of Sherlocking of the mystery was done off screen, and then I think to scenes about him really pressing Marquez, for example, about, did you used to be a driver? You used to be a driver, right? You're a driver. That made no sense in the context of this film, but in the way that Andy's describing the 1974 version, that actually makes sense, because you had this cast of characters that was part of the story that Poirot was leading into. So now it seems like he's just kind of poking at things that don't seem to have any relevance, no context except for what's off screen. So I think that's a really good point, Tom.
The establishing of what Andy's talking about makes sense. Instead, they Hollywooded it and tried to give us a Poirot. Let me do that once. Poirot?
Yep, that's right.
Good enough. I'm not even going to try his first name. Poirot, a sort of save the cat at the Wailing Wall in this kind of clever, bizarre, doesn't really make that much sense way to solve a mystery. It was trying to make us like him and show him that he's world renowned and loved and is this big famous person. Whereas ideally, and I'm not trying to rewrite the book, obviously, but if it had started with the investigation of the Armstrongs, it would have set this up instead of them going and treating it like a big reveal. It's about the Armstrong case.
Right.
I already have 12 people and I don't even know who these 12 people are. And now we have this whole other family. It was just that's where it felt like those bad Scooby-Doo mysteries where usually it was the caretaker, but every once in a while Scooby-Doo would be like, oh, it's Dave, the guy we never met. That's what this felt like. Just someone that they're like, oh, no, it was Steve the entire time. You didn't know who Steve was? Well, that's because we didn't tell you about him. Gotta go.
Let's tell you about him now. Right.
Let's tell you about him now in real time and pretend and film it in a way that it's as if we're all making the same conclusions together. And instead, I'm just watching one person who knows all the information make conclusions based on information I don't have. That's what I kind of meant by numbing. I was just watching someone figure things out that I never could have.
What I will say that I did like about the open in this particular film, despite the fact that I completely agree with you as far as what it's not allowing this story to do. What I do like is it's giving us a sense of how successful Poirot is at solving mysteries and just like he is a real mystery solver. I think perhaps in the 70s, they might not needed to have done that because my recollection is that was a period in time where there were more Agatha Christie adaptations being made. So there were, like, I think Albert Finney actually had starred as Poirot in some other films. And so I think
the reputation
had already
preceded him.
People had seen him as the successful detective. You didn't need to kind of set that up. Whereas in 2017, I don't think people are going back and cracking Agatha Christie novels, or certainly not watching the adaptations, going, "Oh, that Poirot, he's such a great detective."
Right? No, it's a good point. I understand why they did it, and I guess that's why I brought up that maybe at its heart, for me, this material seems like it was always going to be a little bit unsatisfactory for me.
Yeah.
Because it is so drenched in a backstory, an off-screen backstory.
And I think maybe, it could be the way they told the story here. I mean, it really feels like it's a movie about Poirot, not a movie about this case, which I think the book, I don't know because I haven't read the book and it sounds like none of us have read this, but this book actually is listed in Goodreads as Hercule Poirot number 10. Of hers, right? So she was writing him as he approached all these different cases. And that's kind of what they give us, right? They give us that front end story about Jerusalem. And then he's trying to go on holiday. He gets pulled towards into this one. And as he leaves, that's how we end this story is he's solved this case and he's dealt with his conscience with it. And he gets immediately pulled off to another case. And so it's kind of the story of Poirot. And I think that maybe if you do love Agatha Christie, or if you're into that, you realize that the way maybe Kenneth Branagh was making this movie about Poirot as opposed to Murder on the Orient Express, this case, where it would have needed to be told differently in the way that it was in 74, where you actually spend the time with the case here. But definitely the focus of this story was on the people making the movie, as opposed to the story of how to reveal it to us. At least that's the way I felt there. Did it feel like, I guess Andy's the only one that can really tell us this. Did it feel like the script differed significantly in the two novels or in the two screenplays? And from what I've seen, it's very different from what was actually in the book in terms of frame of reference, for example.
My recollection of the 74 story is, for the most part, I mean, the investigation, everything kind of is the same. It's not that different. I felt like they really kind of tried to tack on some elements to make it feel a lot more cinematic, like take us out of the train for God's sakes. Like the whole chase of Josh Gad down the different levels of the bridge. Like that whole thing just seemed, absurdly tacked on to me.
Yeah, 40 minutes in, we got to have some running around.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Plus the avalanche that hits it. I mean, it just seemed like seemed a little too big to kind of take on the train. I mean, in the other version, it's just, there had been an avalanche that covered the tracks, and the train just had to stop and sit there while they waited for people to come clean it. It wasn't something that nearly swept them out.
Far more believable in the old other version.
Yeah. And I don't recall actually in the 74 version if the doctor starts shooting at Poirot. Like I don't think that happened, but
that's a change. So the doctor wasn't a doctor in the 74 version, nor was he a doctor in the book. He was actually an army person. The doctor, that is a blending of two characters for this version, which I think is really interesting too.
There were more characters originally?
Well,
there's so many characters in this movie.
I mean, there was a doctor on the train, but this character was the Arbuthnot, I guess is how you say that.
Yeah, he was the colonel.
He was a colonel, and so he was more directly connected to the Armstrong case in the earlier version of the story. So yeah, I think that's interesting. The story, I mean, maybe the way that it was told is really what has affected us here. Now, I'm actually being swayed a little bit by your descriptions of the way things are done here, because I approached it with pretty simple eyes. It was fairly entertaining. It wasn't a great movie to me, but it was, again, it felt like a showpiece for the people assembled in this cast and for the way they shot the movie. And that felt like it might have been Pranagh's choice. Did you guys feel like it was a sort of luxury vehicle for him at all?
Just like an actor's film?
Yes, definitely. Well, an actor's film, and specifically, if Branagh is bringing this to the screen and he is making it far more about Poirot than about the case, for example, if that's the differentiator that we're talking about here, is that a decision that you make as a director that you bring to the story?
My recollection of Albert Finney as Poirot is that he was as big and over the top as Branagh was here. I felt like it's, that's the character. And I was wrong. Albert Finney only played him once. I think I was thinking of Peter Ustinov, who played him like 10 times.
Got it.
It is an actor's story, though. I felt like he cast it really well. I thought the cast was, I thought everybody did their parts really well. I really enjoyed all of them. And even the smaller bits, but I think that they moved things around in ways where, like in the 74 version, it was Ingrid Bergman who played the lady from the convent, and she won an Oscar, Best Supporting Oscar for her role, which I didn't think it was necessarily that great of a performance, but I guess other people did at the time. And in this particular case, like I certainly didn't think Penelope Cruz did anything special here.
No.
If I was going to single any of them out, I would say Michelle Pfeiffer is the one I would single out.
Yeah, well, and again, looking at the cast for both films, it looks like it's almost a vehicle for actors altogether. So I'm glad that you have the sort of context to say that Finney was that big as well. Then maybe it really is the sort of more of the issue of where we are in time and how it relates to the original source material. Maybe we needed to have this explained in more deeply for Poirot, because Joe Public does not have context for Agatha Christie in the way that they might have in the 70s.
And also, I think they needed to give us a human. I mean, one of the big differences, as I understand it from the book from Scott and the movie, is Poirot is never a tortured figure. His interminable talks to the picture of his, I don't know, late wife, late girlfriend, whoever Lady Kate was? Catherine.
Yeah.
Was just him talking to himself.
Of a young Emma Thompson, by the way, in this movie, which is interesting because they used
to. Was it really? Yeah. Oh, from Peter's Friends.
That's crazy.
Easter egg.
That's interesting. Huh. Was trying to give it a pulse, because unfortunately, one of the other things is this movie is filled with a bunch of unlikable people.
And you mean the characters?
The character.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I want to go next step by step. Penelope Cruz, don't care for her. Daisy Ridley, pass. No, I mean, the characters, we learn incredibly little about them.
Right.
That's also a problem that I have. We can get into at some point, like going into the movie, how it begins and how we feel as it goes forward. But it's a bunch of unlikable people. And Poirot, as I understand, at most is kind of a brilliant, persnickety antihero, kind of like Sherlock Holmes. He's not likable. Right. He's the smartest person in the room. He knows he's the smartest person in the room, and he has a little bit of OCD and stuff. So to give him Kenneth really kind of changed Poirot into a little bit more of a Mary Sue character in making himself the smartest and the most feeling and the most, not godlike, but the person that is definitely cares the most about morals and is so tortured by it, and has a talk with his late wife's photograph about how can I do this and I'm stuck and all these. It makes sense. I don't like it. It didn't help me, but it makes sense that it gives the film at least a beating heart, because everyone else really doesn't have that much time. There's just
well, so now we've all read 10 Little Indians, and one of the interesting things about how it differs here is that we talk about how each of those characters doesn't necessarily have feeling, like you're saying, and now we start getting into the spoilers of the story. Each of them is playing a role to some degree. Each of their characters is lying to some degree as well. So that is maybe an essential point in telling the story too, to give Poirot a heart, because specifically no one is going to have a heart on this train.
It's just I think it's just a challenge when you have so many characters to really flesh them out. And honestly, that's my recollection of the Agatha Christie films I've seen and of the book, is that these are not necessarily designed as, stories with fully fleshed out characters. I mean, they might be interesting characters in context of the story, but they're not necessarily characters that I can say, wow, I really understand that character. I felt the arc of them over the course of the story. They all fit in her little puzzles, to solve these mysteries. And I think that's, if you look at the size of her books, they're really short. And I think it's basically, this is the mystery, these are the characters, boom.
Right. So you think about a movie that did that well, and what about Clue the movie? Right? Where I don't think anyone would argue that, we didn't really know those characters, but it was the same kind of thing. And yet it's a wonderful cult classic, is it not?
Yeah, I would argue that we probably don't know those characters any more than we know these characters. It's just that they're awfully fun and silly.
They're more fun. Yeah.
They're stronger types. They're pushed farther into their one lane kind of a thing. And I believe there are a lot fewer. There's just too many people for this. And again, this is me complaining about the trying to make this into a movie and what's going against it. Because I know that when that train takes off in the beginning of one of many, for me, dodgy special effects shots, I never believed that train ever really existed. That when they're taking off, that's the Titanic moment of we've met everyone, and the Titanic and the music is swelling. And that was one of the first times I was like, oh no, I'm not where the film thinks I'm supposed to be. I know almost no one. I don't care. I haven't
caught up with anything yet. Yeah.
I do not care about anyone. Having Poirot do a Wailing Wall trip someone with his cane, which I liked. I thought that was delightful. But then having a child, seemingly in reshoots, over smile at him. Like trying to cute up this inscrutable, not pleasant character. I was like, this is not I don't feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be. And it never really got better.
Interesting.
At the end of the movie, after the reveal, the final supper of everyone spread out at the table, and you find out you're listening to, I believe, Poirot give voiceover to his late wife, girlfriend. I still don't know who that was. And it's a follow shot. It's a tracking shot behind him going through all the cars of the train, and then finally ending with everyone in that final car. And I loved that shot. And I realized, that's what was missing, is he didn't set the table very well. Kenneth Branagh, I mean, in that when we see the length of the train and stuff, it's that interminable, and I thought not good looking tracking shot from outside the train.
Right.
With Michelle Pfeiffer in weirdly dubbed language, talking to him in a not convincing way, and you're seeing some of the people sort of forlornly or mysteriously looking out of the window. I couldn't understand. That's what you want. If you're going to have a locked room mystery, you start by showing the locked room.
The locked room.
You show you do a tracking shot behind the person and show everything of what here is where we're going to be in these 6 cars, in these 4 cars, whatever it is. And that's when the train took off and left. I was like, that's what was missing. Like I don't know why I keep going to Titanic, but it seems a little bit like we have 8 people. We got to meet them really fast, give them all little personalities, and then we're off. That's kind of what Titanic is too. Titanic had huge tracking shots through the different rooms.
Right.
through all these things, finding out where we're going to be. That seemed like such a misstep to me that I never really understood where everything was in connection with where everyone was, whose compartment was next to whose. And that's a real big problem for me.
That also had a really awkward audio cut that kind of bugged me. I mean, I could see why they did it, but it bugged me all the same. When you're tracking outside the train of him and Michelle Pfeiffer talking, and you hear all of the sounds of the station and everything. And then at that point where you do cut in all of a sudden into their conversation as it cuts to, I think, his face as he's replying to her or something like that, the sound totally changes. You lose everything outside of it. And it's just like, all of a sudden it's like, wham, you're in the train now. It's like, that was a really abrupt way to thrust us into it. So.
Right. And it seemed like a choice that was done more for the glory of showing that tracking shot, which in general doesn't feel like it has a lot of purpose. Now, I think that potentially it could be just a misstep, Tommy, in that what you're talking about, instead that they may have chosen to represent the locked room from the outside. So us looking as audience members looking in at all these people who are held here, which I think is a misstep, because I think what you're describing sounds far more effective of putting us in the situation with them and having us experience that locked room. But it during the moment, I didn't even feel that it was that thoughtful. It felt like it was more like, let's just show this cool tracking motion control shot outside the train. And it kind of failed in that we didn't really get to see much. And we just heard that voiceover until that abrupt audio cut that you're talking about, Andy. So I think in general, most of the motion control stuff, I liked the way it looked, but outside of that, it didn't feel like it was purposeful for what they were trying to accomplish in the film.
It was weird. It felt like a show-off shot that both didn't show off because I didn't think it looked great. There was obviously a sound problem. Even past what Andy said towards the end, there was garbledy stuff going on with Michelle Pfeiffer. You could tell that it had been redubbed. And yeah, it was a show-off shot that actually did the exact opposite.
Brana shot this in 65 millimeter. And I know like they put a lot of work into that last tracking shot through the train, which, as I understood it, actually continued through his whole speech out the train. And then the cameraman got into a lift as it kind of went up and looked at the train as it took off, and he walked over to the car.
Oh,
like I think it was actually
shot?
the full thing that they ended up cutting into.
Oh, they did cut into it. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, they did cut into it quite a bit. But I wonder if they put all their eggs in the basket of putting that shot together. And because of the complexities of doing that sort of stuff with 65 millimeter cameras, they opted to not do it earlier in the film, which seems a little backward to me.
Yeah, it seems cart before the horse a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't actually know what that phrase means, but I like it. I'm a horse guy.
No, I think... Well, and that's, I mean, if we look at how the film was shot altogether, it was very pretty. I didn't notice the joyful things that I've from the last 65/70 millimeter shot film that I saw, which is Hateful Eight, where I was just impressed throughout with the different things they did and the way that they made that look. This had moments of that for me, but like you're describing there, Andy, I had no idea that was the way that was shot because of the fact that they cut into it. So it seemed less than special to me. It seemed sort of standard to me, and maybe they just need to hire a different motion control Wonder cameraman. But that's,
For our listeners, what kind of things does shooting on 65 millimeter give you?
It gives you big releases if you have the right theaters. I mean, here in the States, it's only playing in LA and New York in the 65 millimeter format. It's just a big, beautiful print. I mean, you're getting a giant
print.
Okay, you're getting 4 times as much image in each frame. So it just makes for really lush images. And I can see with some of the lushness, because it certainly was a very lush film and there's a lot of beautiful stuff to look at. I can see why perhaps they chose to look at, or to film it this way, though maybe not as, it doesn't make as much sense as like when he made Hamlet back in the mid 90s. Because this is just kind of like much like Tarantino. It's like, why are you doing it with this format in something that is just like an enclosed space for the duration of the film? Right. In both cases, it's a little perplexing. But still, I think it does make a much more beautiful image. But it's like it's hard to find places that show that more these days. So it's also frustrating that they do that. I think Dunkirk was the last. It was rare, I think, nowadays to get 2 films. Dunkirk wasn't completely 65 millimeter, but I know some of it was. And it's interesting to have 2 films in a year that have some of that 65 millimeter footage shot.
So there are only certain. So what you're saying is there are only certain theaters where you can actually see it in its full glory.
Exactly.
Gotcha. So potentially, what we saw is limited.
Absolutely. I mean, because it's only LA and New York in the United States.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Tommy, where did you see it in LA?
Sherman Oaks at a nice theater, but they didn't. If
It wouldn't have been
usually
that
they
one.
would
I think
brag
it's
about
ArcLight.
things like I saw it at the ArcLight, but it was showing at a couple different theaters, and usually they like to brag about things like Atmos or if it's on a different type of film, and it was not. I mean, it was not bragged about, so I'm not sure.
In LA, it's at the Aero Cinema in Santa Monica.
Nope,
And the ArcLight Hollywood.
neither me. Okay,
Yeah.
so no, I did not see it on 65 millimeter.
So I wonder what would really see. I think that you make a good point there, Andy, and that the majority of this film is shot in this closed environment. I mean, literally, this is like the smallest train that I've ever seen. So I wonder what things we're really missing out on by not seeing it in that wide format.
Especially because it looked to me like a lot of the seemingly repetitive shots coming over the mountaintop to reveal the train on the other side. Sorts of shots were I know they shot some in Switzerland and stuff like that, but obviously there's a lot of CG elements thrown in there.
How did you guys? I brought up that I had thought that a lot of the CG was pretty dodgy. That I didn't believe in it. It felt like they didn't spend the time or the money, most importantly, the money potentially on, because this film is not highly reviewed.
When you say highly reviewed, do you mean critically acclaimed?
Critically acclaimed, yes.
Sure. Yeah, it's a 53 right now on Rotten Tomatoes, and I actually, after seeing it, thought it would be lower than
that. Sometimes because there's so many advanced screenings that you do, especially with a prestige piece, sometimes when a movie like that has these grandiose shots that don't look good CG wise, that's a studio hedging some of their bets, making it looking good enough, saying whenever we can get out of the train, let's do it and have it sweeping, but not doing that final finish and just having it look a little bit more like the Polar Express.
Right.
Than the Orient
Well,
Express.
I think it's interesting that you brought up Titanic because it reminded me a lot of that, like where we actually are seeing a model mixed with CGI and a potential, like a green screen background.
We can do all this much better now.
Stuff. Yeah. So
if they're willing to pony up the money. Yeah.
Right. The stuff where we saw tracking motion control shots external to the train that were clearly on a sort of green screen set with this model, that was really rough to me. It reminded me of the stuff we saw in Titanic that was amazing then, but is not so amazing anymore.
Yeah, agreed. No, I never really believed that the train was there.
Yeah, it's interesting because I know they shot some of it with a real train, but for me, I felt like it was really just the blending of things where it ended up just feeling not quite as effective as it should have been.
Agreed.
So,
I guess I didn't mean to say that the train didn't exist, but the train didn't exist in where it was.
In the space.
Whenever it was
100% true.
Exactly. Yeah.
Definitely noticeable of that. Yeah.
And I was let down by the lack of opulence in the train. Everyone was acting like a rich jerk, as if the train was like the nicest thing in the world. It seemed very cramped. And Kenneth Branagh actually made, or as JJ says, Branagh, made some interesting choices of actually seeming to be a stickler for restricting his filmmaking to the physics and space of the train. So for me personally, some interminable long shot from God's eye view down where you get very little detail, so many vertical, and you would do that. I would think that, one way is to be fancy, one way is to be artsy, but also that if you don't want to break out that fake wall,
right.
You don't have to do that, but he wanted to do that. And I thought that didn't help. And there was a great, just real quick, because it's about one of these shot from top looking down shots. It's a finest hour. My finest hours award for worst ADR is when they find Johnny Depp's body. The entire scene is played looking down, so you can't ever see Perot or his sidekicks' mouths. So they're talking and they're talking and they're talking and they're finding clues and stuff. And he goes, and at one point he goes, "And what's this? A pipe cleaner?" And his sidekick goes,
right.
"Another clue." Right. That was great. I would love for real detectives to be like, "Hold on, another clue. That's great. It's fantastic. Clear, like my guess is that studio people were like, we can't see their faces for this entire shot, then keep the dialogue rat-a-tat-tat.
Yeah.
Like keep, you know what I mean? We can't have you slow play this. So, and their answer was to have someone say another clue. That's amazing.
I wonder how much of that actually did end up coming from them after the fact, or how much of it came from Michael Green writing the book or writing the adaptation. Because I will say, as a screenwriter, like he's worked on stuff like Logan, and Blade Runner 2049, but he's also worked on stuff like Alien Covenant. And so, and Green Lantern. So it's like, boy, he really is. There's a real flip flopping.
He's all over the map,
and it's sole credit. So it makes me really wonder, if how much of that came out.
There is a book that's been written, so much of the screenplay is going to be editing. Right at this point is figuring out what you can keep in and what you can't. So it'll be interesting. It would be interesting to see what his contribution was and what sort of creative steps they took away from the novel in the first place.
Yeah.
If we talk about one of the things that I think is interesting, since we're still talking about camera, I think we should go in there too, is that we never actually see the inside of any of the rooms except for the big car. Like you mentioned that vertical shot that when we see Johnny Depp's body, we never see any other perspective from that room. So when we find out things later on about how like they have a shared door with he has a shared door with one of the other passengers and stuff like that. That's all stuff that's just being held out to us and we have no way to inspect, which also kind of leads us back to the fact that the way the story is being told in this way is we are learning it with Poirot and we are victim or slave to what he decides to sort of conclude on his own, which is a weakness in the way they tell the story.
It's so frustrating. You know, when you set that up in that beginning tracking shot.
Sure.
They do a much better job in the 1974 version. I mean, obviously they didn't have the camera tricks and all that to do, but you do get a better sense of the rooms, of just, where people are in the rooms and everything. It just made the space feel a lot more logical, like in our heads, whereas like, okay, I understand the doors between the rooms. I think they even she actually shut her door. There's an emphasis of that whole thing. So, I mean, there's
to see that it's there.
Yeah, exactly. There are all of those elements introduced earlier on.
Not like I would have solved the mystery, but again, and I don't mean to keep belaboring the point, but I want the chance.
Yeah.
I want to know where I am, who's who, and where's where. So at least I feel like I'm a part of the conversation.
When we talk about other comparisons with the 1974, I don't know that we want to compare the cast up and down because there's so many people to talk about in this. But I'm going to quickly run through all the names of the actors who are in this version. And then afterwards, I want you guys to pick out some of those that you thought were interesting, either positively or negatively about this, because it's such a long list of powerful people. Kenneth, you guys can pronounce his name however you want to. Johnny Depp, Michelle Pfeiffer, Penelope Cruz, we've talked about all those. Leslie Odom Jr., Daisy Ridley, Josh Gad, Derek Jacobi, Judi Dench, Lucy Boynton, Willem Dafoe, Olivia Colman, Sergei Polunin, and Marwan Kenzari. I don't know him exactly for Pierre Michel. And then also there was the book character as well. Which of those characters did you think was significant enough to talk about here? I think we talked a little bit about Michelle Pfeiffer before. What did you guys think of her performance?
I thought she was great. I mean, she played the part that Lauren Bacall had in the 74 version, and they both did a great job. But I think Michelle Pfeiffer, for me, they gave her, I felt like the writers this time gave her a little more meat. And so her bits at the end, like I really connected with her and the story when we had the reveal of all of them coming in and killing Ratchet, Cassetti. I really, like, from that point on, I really just kind of enjoyed what they were doing. And I really felt Michelle was great in this. And she brought a lot to the table, I thought
she was great too. I thought it was interesting. They shot her in a way that made her look old through most of the film until the reveal. And then they gave her a soft focus. And it was interesting because...
Oh, they did? I didn't notice that.
Yeah, it's really because she all of a sudden became beautiful at the end in a really interesting way, which she was also just in Mother. And she's so gorgeous.
Good in Mother.
in Mother. So they must have made a choice from a makeup perspective or from a lighting perspective to shoot her that way, which I think is interesting in terms of the story. But in general, I mean, she was great in this character, and what an interesting thing that she's now the parallel to the Lauren Bacall character in 74. I wonder if these actors, when they signed on, if they thought about legacy when they were connecting with these original actors.
I think there's always something to that when you're reprising a role. But I also think actors, they have to get themselves out of that headspace.
Sure.
Because they don't want that to, they don't want to feel like they're informing them or anything. Exactly. They want to make their own mark.
Gotcha. Who else did you find interesting in their role? I thought Josh Gad was great. I was really happy to see him in this kind of role.
Yeah, he was great. And Anthony Perkins was the role in the 74 version. And I really enjoyed Anthony Perkins in that one. It was kind of fun seeing him. But Josh Gad, I just think is just an actor who's really exciting to watch. So I enjoyed him as McQueen.
He's one of the few that I think got a really meaty scene. The one problem that I had was not a problem with him, but with the script is he really did seem to turn on a dime during his meaty scene. He was like, I'm never going to tell you anything. And then Perot does one smart thing. And he's like, well, here's everything. And immediately starts crying. I get it. You got to keep things moving along. But I thought he acted a, at times, hurriedly written role very well.
It was a shame that they had to do that chase down the scaffolding of the bridge, because that was nonsense.
And that's, from what little I understand of Poirot, that just seems like studio pressure, because Poirot is the guy that sets up his cane at the Wailing Wall. So he literally doesn't have to move.
Right.
For him to be the one chasing after, that was just silly and sad. And they're worried about being stuck in a train.
Where was he going to go?
He was trying to set that stuff on fire.
And then he was going to catch the other train.
But I think Poirot was chasing after him, and so he was just trying to make sure he got to a place where he could burn the stuff before Poirot got it. Is that what it was? I don't know.
It's
so weird.
Tough. You have to do work to make that work.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was not in there. I guess, in that long list of people that I put in there, the other person that I would mention was Willem Dafoe. He didn't really have much for me there. I love him. I love him in pretty much everything I see, but I thought his role, talk about turning on a dime. It's like, oh, and by the way, you're not Austrian, and then all of a sudden, oh, okay, now we're going to just get all the exposition about who he really is.
Yeah.
And then
there was nothing to his character for me at all.
Seeing this and the Florida Story, within a few weeks of each other, it just goes to show that he is an actor who just does a lot of really interesting things. And I mean, he's totally different here than he was in the Florida Story. So
I can't wait to see that. It's not allowed that I live in Los Angeles, and I haven't seen that because I know it's not all over the country yet, but I'm really excited to see that movie.
It's definitely tough. It's definitely unlikable characters, but
well, it's tough because Willem Dafoe got his I'm not Austrian speech, and then later in the Final Supper scene, I'm just harping too much about the script, got to give a very eloquent speech about someone that we had never met and never would, when he had a whole monologue about, I told her she could do better, but there she was with a casserole for our dates. And I'm like, what are you talking about? We've never met any of the Armstrongs. Stop it. I'm very angry. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And the other piece is that we don't really care about the Armstrongs. I mean, we understand that their story is significant, but they never do a good job in this movie of wedding us to the motive.
No,
it's a motive that we learn and the why that the murder happens. But outside of that, I don't have an emotional connection to it other than the story that all these other people have.
And to be fair, I mean, even the 74 version, you don't get that. You just get these newspaper clippings of kind of like, or it's like newspaper clipping / newsreel footage type of setup of the Armstrong baby kidnapping story. So you don't really get to know them very well there either. Maybe that's for me just kind of inevitable when it comes to Agatha Christie mysteries, because you're just not, everything is just, pieces for the plot to move along. And I think that, the characters, as interesting as they might be, just there's not a lot to them. She gives you enough so you go, okay, so that's who that is. Got it.
Yeah. And that was evident too. I think the movie came in at 1 hour, 54 minutes. No, is that right? Yeah. Just under 2 hours.
Yeah.
And I don't know what they could have done either way. Making it longer wouldn't have necessarily made it better at this point.
As far as other characters, the Countess, who turns out to be the Countess, who's Lady Barbital.
Yeah.
That's the Countess.
That's the Countess. And her dancer husband, like half the movie goes by, and then they show up again. And I'm like, right.
Yeah, that
They
was
were on the train too.
Yeah.
I'd forgot you were even in this movie, and I'm starting to really lose the plot and who's who. I guess, again, it's that a little bit of that numbing effect if they just didn't give me enough to hang on to. So I think it was well acted, underwritten, but you're right, JJ, in that overwriting it would have just made it longer. It's tough to figure out how to make these characters stick a bit more. And it was a nightmare, as longtime listeners will know. I'm not good at a lot of things, and one of them are proper nouns. Unless you immediately, someone says Steve and the film cuts to Steve. So a lot of time there was a lot of talk about Marquez, and I did not know who Marquez was.
Right.
I didn't know who it was. And I was like, oh, it's probably the African-American character because everyone's already been saying bad things about African-American. And then the guy goes, or that other guy because of his skin color. And I'm like, ugh, who's Marquez? I have no idea what's going on. That was me for a lot of the movie.
That's unfortunate. And Marquez in particular had very little to do in this movie. He had a lot of screen time, but he didn't have a whole lot of roles. He was technically the salesman, right? That's how he was sold.
Was he the car guy? I'm still not even sure.
Yeah, he's the car
guy.
guy.
Oh,
He's
yeah,
the car guy. Matthew Fox with a mustache.
I think I forgot
With
to
the
put him on this list, actually.
In the conservatory. Yeah. Right. Nobody mentioned Kenneth. How did you think old Kenneth did in his role?
He really loved himself.
I loved him too, actually. I thought he was so much fun as Poirot, and the mustache. Like, I don't know. I think he's such a crazy character. I think Kenneth Branagh is one of those actors that, even when he's being an over the top Russian in Jack Ryan Shadow Recruit, there's something just kind of crazy and fun to enjoy with him. So
I liked his humor in this. I actually laughed a couple times out loud, particularly when he met Josh Gad and said, "I'm equally disappointed in you,"
That was a great line. That
was a great line. And he, whether or not he was loving himself because that's what he envisioned Poirot to do, or the way that, he was delivering the lines. I thought it was fun. And I actually thought the level of humor in this movie was kind of good. I was happy with it, that it wasn't too over the top. And then some of the things hit me and I actually laughed. So that was kind of special for me.
Yep.
One of the things that I didn't like was the music. For most of the film, it was not bothersome, but early on, especially with the Wailing Wall scene, the music treated the entire Wailing Wall intro as if it were a film in and of itself. So when Poirot has his sort of monologue and he's telling the soldier that he doesn't arrest at the beginning about his process, there's these sweeping moves about that this is actually a climax to denouement of a movie that we didn't see, and it completely took me out of the movie. And so I had a negative feeling about the music the whole way through. Did you guys have any feelings about Patrick Doyle stuff?
Generally, I really love Patrick Doyle. I think he's an incredibly strong composer. He is always working with Branagh. They are working with each other quite a bit. And I will say, I actually liked all the themes in the film. I honestly, I can't recall the opening. So I'm blanking on what you're talking about as far as the Wailing Wall music.
It was when they were standing up, and it was after the Wailing Wall, and they were standing up and they were in some sort of like balcony and just giving, I don't know.
Yeah, when he's talking to the guy who's supposed to take him to the ship.
When he's getting the new job.
Yeah,
yes.
I can't remember the music there, but on the whole, I enjoyed it.
Well, good. Yeah. Then I'm probably just unfortunately touched incorrectly by that particular scene.
Well, and I don't know. I mean, I just like Patrick Doyle in general, and so this is one where I feel like I can't pinpoint the themes; they're not stuck in my head. I just remember going, "Oh, I enjoy it quite a bit," but I'm going to have to listen to it a few times to really say how well it sticks with me or not.
So, thinking about how it's going to do, my theater was interestingly above average in terms of attendance. I went and saw it on Friday morning, the early show, at about 11 in the morning, and there were a lot of people. Most of them were pretty old, I will say. It skewed to be an older audience.
Ours too.
But there were a lot of people in there. I was impressed with that.
Yeah, I mean, I live right next to Sun City, which is 55 and older community, and so it was all. I think I was probably the youngest person in the theater when I saw it, but it was largely full, and that was an earlier show today. So, it looks like it's doing well for itself. I don't know. The box office predictions right now are kind of torn if it or Daddy's Home 2 is going to take the second place spot. Nothing's expected to knock Thor Ragnarok out of the top spot. So
Sure.
It'll be interesting to see exactly if this one is able to kind of sustain an audience. I'm not quite sure. I don't know. I just feel like I'm so perplexed with the 65 millimeter decision on this film, because it seems like such an expensive endeavor to do with a film that doesn't necessarily have a guaranteed audience
and doesn't need it.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, it's not an expanse. It's the opposite of it. Like you said about Hateful Eight, it's not an expansive movie. It sounds like a director being indulgent with himself all over the place.
Right.
I get that it's like going back to that it's a old prestige piece, and then also the fight against digitalization and stuff, but it just seems like the exact opposite of why would you do that?
Yeah, I think we'll need some more legitimate, profound choices for this kind of shooting to fight the right way, and not have them be these sort of, if it's the Hateful Eight and if it's this, where it doesn't necessarily make a whole lot of sense. I don't think that's actually going to have
Lawrence
the
of
right
Arabia.
effect. Right.
That choice. Yeah.
Yeah, like pick one of those movies, like do The English Patient and shoot it that way. Do something like that, and
please don't remake The English Patient.
Well, no, I don't. But you know what I mean. Like, do something where it's going to show off what it can do, as opposed to something that really doesn't need it in the first place.
Yeah.
Well, it makes you wonder, just the smart business sense of doing it like this in the first place with movies like this, because it's like, if it's not going to make its money back, it's not going to do any good for the format anyway. So if you're going to use 65 millimeter, make sure it's a movie that's going to, get a lot of money back at the box office, so that more people go, oh, hey, look how successful that was. I just feel like it's a strange decision to kind of, for these directors who are these film lovers who want to keep using these formats to move forward with films that aren't necessarily moneymakers.
Yeah, I haven't been able to find anywhere about the budget on this. Have you guys seen any numbers for that?
I thought that they read that they wanted a 20 million opener.
What I'm seeing 55 million for the production budget, but the 20 million is accurate for what they've got in the first week here. They're expecting 19 million this weekend. But I think, the reason why I think it's important to this part of the conversation is that I think if they take second place, that they'll consider it a victory for this film.
Well, and certainly, I mean, I think it already had its release most everywhere else. I think we were like a week behind everyone. So, maybe it'll build internationally and get more people that way. I don't know.
It seems like it was being released as a prestige, like for an Oscar thing, though, for now. To release it now, it's certainly not going to be recognized as such, or is it a little too early to say that?
No, certainly. I mean, November. I mean, definitely. I think it's the Oscar time.
Yeah.
But it's one of those ones where, I wouldn't be surprised if, like the one from '74 that did get Ingrid Bergman an Oscar, I wouldn't be surprised if they're pushing Michelle Pfeiffer for a supporting actress nomination.
Oh, sure.
That could be. They're definitely not doing it with Penelope Cruz.
I can't imagine they would. Like, I feel like they were giving it to Michelle, because it seems like she's the one in this cast, more so than Ingrid in the previous one, that stands out as the big role.
Yeah, that makes sense to me too.
One thing that did make me laugh in the theater, because it's a victim of its time, not a victim of its time, but some of the people in the movie are very racist, and some are pretending to be racist. Some actually are racist. And when Poirot starts to give his big speech at the end after the Last Supper scene, when he's going to decide what he's going to tell the police, and he comes out to everyone and he says, well, everyone, I have made my decision, and after thinking about everything, the police have decided to go with my version. The black fella did it. Bye. And then he just runs off the train and just runs away. I thought that would be funny.
Well, and there weren't any people of color in the original version of this, right? Not in the '74 version, and not in the original publishing of it either, the 1933 publishing.
But there's so much Semitism and the color of skin stuff. I liked it if he would have just taken the easy way out and been like, and we know what the police are going to believe.
Well, you got to wonder if the Semitism was in the original version, right? From 1933. Is that part of it too? I know that NPR, so I read NPR's review of the movie, and they called it out for a lot of forced diversity casting and storytelling, which I think is interesting.
I might be mixing her up with a different author, and I apologize if I am, but I don't know if, kind of like Edgar Allan Poe, that some of early Agatha Christie stuff doesn't translate that well. If you know what I mean. In terms
of politically
correctness in today's thing. So, but I'm not sure about that. So that was fun.
It's definitely a possibility. I know that a lot of the reviews of this film are coming out that way, saying that they've changed it in ways that they're trying to accommodate that politically correct mindset, and some of it looks forced in the way that they did. So your thought and your joke there may be seemingly appropriate based on the changes that they're trying to make.
Well, just reading about her on Wikipedia, it says Christie occasionally inserted stereotyped descriptions of characters into her work, particularly before the end of the Second World War, when such attitudes were more commonly expressed publicly, and particularly in regard to Italians, Jews, non-Europeans, and sometimes Americans. The last usually as impossibly naive or uninformed. So it does sound like it's something that she was guilty of.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, I think now is the time that we're going to rank it.
All aboard the murder train! Flick chart.
If you folks out there in the world haven't done so yet, check out www.flickchart.com. It provides a fun way to look at the movies that you love and some of the ones that you hate too. By creating a tournament-style stack ranking system, we go through the exercise here on every show of ours, and you can find our special stack rankings for the movies we've seen on this show at flickchart.com/TNR Film Board. So where do we start our fight for the murder train?
We're going to kick it off. Murder on the Orient Express or Side Effects?
Side effects.
Yeah, I'll say Side Effects. Murder on the Orient Express.
Most of us always say Side Effects. Side Effects is a weird soft spot for all of us.
It's an odd Soderbergh one, yeah, but it's one that sticks though.
Yeah.
I think, so it's interesting. Next up, we have Murder on the Orient Express or The Equalizer.
The Equalizer.
I
liked it.
I have to. Can I not abstain because there's three of us?
You can. Go ahead.
You can abstain.
I have to. Then I have to abstain. I've seen the movie, but I wasn't a part of the review. Oh wait, how does abstaining work?
Oh, that doesn't matter as long as you've seen it.
Oh, the equal.
I'm going to say Murder on the Orient Express. I'll take Poirot any day.
So you guys are on equal sides?
No, we're opposites.
You're a tie, I mean?
We're a tie.
Yes, we're a tie.
Then I abstain.
What?
You can't if you've seen it.
Oh, okay. I think the Equalizer.
Thank you.
All right, Murder on the Orient Express or Insurgent. I will say Murder on the Orient Express.
Which one was Insurgent? The first one?
The second one.
Oh, yeah. Murder.
Murder on the Orient Express or the Wolverine.
Ooh.
Wolverine has two good sequences.
Yeah. I'm going to definitely Murder on the Orient Express.
I'm going to say Murder too.
I'm going to say Wolverine. Throw away my vote.
We did.
Murder on the Orient Express or War Dogs. Oh, so disappointed at that one. I'll say Murder.
I'm going to say Murder on the Orient Express.
I'm going to say War Dogs.
Okay.
Are you throwing it away or is that serious?
No, it's for true.
It's for true.
Yeah.
It's for true.
All right. Murder on the Orient Express or Everest.
Oh,
abstain.
Yuck. Murder on the Orient Express.
Yeah, I'll say Murder on the Orient Express. Also,
cowards! I want a Rosham. Oh.
I can't stand the Rosham.
All right, well that puts it at 49 out of 64. Not super high on our chart, but not super low either. It's kind of at about that 75th percentile or so.
Yeah,
for me, it's a like. I mean, generally the films there that I was voting it over are the ones that were no like for me. And I felt fine about this movie. I think Tommy's opinion totally I agree with. It just didn't make me hate it as much as he did.
Yeah,
I'm a no like. I think it's an unsatisfactory experience with a great twist. Oh, by the way, everyone, they all did it. We never actually came out and said that, right?
Here's the spoiler.
We're the podcast that spoils. That's the first time that we've actually waited that long. They all did it, and half of it doesn't make sense. And
most of it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and why would they wait? And I'll save that for maybe the end. No, I'll do it right now.
Literally every single one of them in the room.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous.
Why would they bother putting the kimono in Poirot's suitcase? Were they trying to frame Poirot? They should throw it if they were trying to do the lone assassin thing. Why would they hide it in the train? Yeah. It doesn't hold up. No like. No like.
So what was your star rating out of 5 though, Tommy?
Oh, I'm 2.5.
Oh, JJ, 2.5 and a like. Okay. And Tommy, what was your star rating?
2.
2 with no like. I am at a 3 and a like. It's I have problems with it, but it's a story that I think is going to be easy to watch. And I think knowing more of the story, I think I maybe am being more forgiving because I can fill in the gaps with it.
Sure. I think that could make a really big difference.
Yeah, it definitely can. So overall, that's about 2.5 and a like. So there you go.
And a couple likes. There we go. So where do we go from here? Next month, the Film Board is back into the Star Wars universe with The Last Jedi. Did you guys already buy tickets? Are you doing the Fandango thing for that?
I'll buy tickets, the day before I go see it.
The Star Wars movie, Last Jedi. Pete, I'm probably going to see it with Pete. And we are already checking our theater, making sure that we can get tickets. It's family adventure for us. So we're looking at that.
My problem is there are too many Christmas parties happening like right around that time. And it's like, I can't pick a night right now because I don't know when I can go. So
I think the Force Awakens came out like 2 weeks or a week or two later than this one. 2 years ago. So I think it's interesting that this is coming out on the week of the 15th.
I think it actually was the same week. Now, since you say that, because I dealt with the same thing. I had Christmas party issues then also.
Oh, maybe it's possible. I probably don't remember that either. Andy, for the weekly show, what's the series that you guys are working on right now?
We are right in the middle of our Ricardo Darín series, Argentine actor. We've done his first or two of our 2 films that we've talked about so far, Nine Queens and Son of the Bride. And next week we are going to be jumping into the Oscar winner for Best Foreign Language Film of 2009, The Secret in Their Eyes. So very much looking forward to that one.
I've been reading the stuff you guys have been talking about with him. I think I really need to see some of those movies. They sound fantastic.
There hasn't been a bad one yet. They are all fantastic.
Behind the scenes question, how do you and Pete choose your runs of movies?
We have a huge list of things that we're like, oh, this would be fun to talk about one day, or that would be fun to talk about one day. And this is one where we have
this database. That's great.
Yeah, and this is one where we happened to at one point we went to our listeners and said, hey, what are you guys interested in us talking about? And somebody in Spain actually is just like, you guys should talk about Argentine actor Ricardo Darín. And we wrote it down and neither of us knew who he was, but we ended up looking him up, and this was several years after the recommendation. And we're like, oh, this looks like an interesting guy. And so that's how we ended up with that series. But we're very happy because we've been really enjoying it.
I love it. Listener participation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Love it.
That's a big thing. Interactivity. Well, and for this movie, the Murder on the Train movie that we watched, I'm glad we talked about it. I think it was a good movie to get out there and watch. I felt like it was very dignified and very grown up as I was seeing it with most of the seniors for me on Friday. So thanks for chatting with me about it, Tommy Handsome.
Always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
And thank you too. Good night, Andy Nelson.
Good night. We'll talk to you when Star Wars rolls around.
That's right. And we should say happy birthday to us again. Happy 6th birthday.
Yay.
Happy birthday. And thank you to
421 shows.
The only reason that we're here is because all of you guys and your support and your listening. We can't thank you enough.
Yes. Thank you so much for listening to us on the Film Board. Go and find us. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter. Join up as a patron on patreon.com/thenextreel. There's cool goodies for big supporters there. If nothing else, consider giving us a rating and a review on iTunes. But tell the filmophiles you know to hang out with us at The Next Reel, because when the movie ends, our conversation begins. Till next.